If you were arrested for domestic violence, especially if you did not do it, you may be wondering, what kind of investigation do the police and the DA actually do? So in this video, I'm going to be going through the steps that the police typically will take during a domestic violence investigation in California. My name is Veronica. I'm a domestic violence defense attorney here in California, and I help people put their cases behind them so that they can enjoy their lives and their freedom. I'm also the creator of a course called Defeat the DVRO, in which I teach you from start to finish how to represent yourself at your restraining order hearing and win. So if that's something that you are interested in, you can get your free first class via the link down below. Okay, so let's jump right in. What does a police investigation for a domestic violence case actually look like? All right, so the investigation typically will start out with a 911 call. This is going to be from a neighbor, from one of the people involved, from a hospital if there was some sort of injury that they suspect was caused by domestic violence. So the police come out, and at this point they have typically gotten some very limited information. They usually don't know, for example, who called the police. They basically just know that it is a suspected domestic violence call and where to go. So they show up, and typically they will try to talk to both people, and typically they will separate them. Now, the thing about separating the people involved and then taking their statements is that typically then that means that there will be one police officer per person, right? So neither one of those two police officers is actually hearing both sides. They each only hear one. Now, during that time, and the order of this can get switched up a bit, they may take photographs of one or both people and whatever they suspect to be the people's injuries. Now, usually what I see is that they will take much better photos of the alleged victim, the person that they are deciding is the victim in this situation. And they may even not take any photos of the person who was arrested, even if that person actually has pretty significant injuries. And I've had clients who told me, look, I had a black eye. By the time I got out of jail, I didn't take photos, or it looked a lot better, but I looked messed up when the police came out and they didn't take any photos. I've had clients who say, well, I had a bloody nose because the other party was the aggressor and hit me in the face. So luckily in that case, in most places in California, there are at least going to be body-worn videos or a mugshot or something that maybe didn't really make it into the police report, but that the defense can go back and obtain to prove that there was actually an injury. Okay, and going back to the investigation, if there are neighbors or other people immediately outside, sometimes the cops will interview them. Not always, and they typically will not knock on doors, especially if it's late at night. So again, this is something that the defense can come in later and have a private investigator go out and talk to those people and see if they heard anything, see if there's anything helpful. Once these interviews and whatever photos they want to take are concluded, they will usually just make an arrest at that point. Now, again, at this point, neither police officer has actually heard the stories of both people typically. So the police make this arrest that is, somewhat at random if there are no clear injuries, or if both people are injured, or if one person is saying, I already had that bruise, and nobody hears both stories. Once the arrest happens, typically most of the activities that the police are going to conduct from there on out are to support the arrest, right? They don't want to be accused of wrongfully arresting someone. And so what they do next is maybe they try to interview the defendant. But the thing is that at this point, once the defendant has been arrested, there's nothing that they can say to get the case dropped. If you're sitting there in the interview room and the cops ask you what happened, typically, after hearing your story, they're not going to say, oh, man, I'm sorry that we arrested you here. We're just going to let you go. Now, does it happen? Do the police sometimes let people go? Yes, but usually it's not because of anything the defendant said. It's usually that somebody higher up within the police has decided to drop this after looking at both sides of the story, or that later on down the road, the DA decides to drop it. What else do the police do? Well, if the defendant bonds out, then they might try to call the defendant or call the victim. Now, if they call the alleged victim and the alleged victim says that they don't want to prosecute, and this happens quite a bit, then they may make a note of that. But remember, the investigation part, like the Sherlock Holmes getting to the bottom of what actually happened, that time has passed. That time was before the arrest. And so they will make a note that the victim doesn't want to prosecute, but sometimes that can actually really backfire, because what is the cop going to write in the report? That they made a wrongful arrest? No. I mean, whatever they write will usually make the alleged victim sound under duress, or like they changed their mind for some reason other than that they told a lie before, or that the police jumped to a conclusion before, and that now the victim is telling the truth. And so they write that in the report so that it can be used against the defendant. And keep in mind that the police can and do lie to the alleged victim to make it seem like, oh, you know what, I'll put in a good word for you. I'm going to submit a new report showing that you want to drop this. Meanwhile, again, whatever is in their report is going to be in support of the arrest. At minimum, they are going to look stupid if they arrested you and now they write another report saying, never mind, let this one go. Now we know the real story. We didn't figure it out before, but now we have finally figured it out. That's not what they do. If they call the alleged victim and the victim says that they do want to prosecute the defendant, then that is also another thing that they can write in the report as something against the defendant. You see where this is going here. A lot of police officers may seem friendly with you. They may be respectful of you, but you have to keep in mind what their job is and the system that they are in. Now, when they call the defendant, if the defendant makes an incriminating statement or something inconsistent with something that they said or something the alleged victim said, then they will note that to make the defendant look like a liar, and again, to use it against the defendant and to support the arrest. After that, they're going to finish writing up their report. The police are the narrator of this report. So they're going to make it seem like they did everything right and that the defendant was arrested based on probable cause. There was a good reason to arrest the defendant. At that point, the police report goes over to the DA, and the police investigation typically is over. Now, from there, does the DA do any investigation? Well, look, I mean, this is the point where I usually tell people before the DA makes a decision, because they get the report and they have to decide whether or not they want to file charges against you. You want an attorney to talk to the DA and try to get them to drop the charges. For domestic violence arrests, you see, if you find yourself in this position, how quickly they make an arrest without really doing that much of an investigation. So a lot of them do end up dropped. There's some potential there. It's not a murder case where they are likely going to file charges and then just see where the chips may fall. This is a case where there is a chance that they will decide not to file charges, but you want someone to get your story and good things about you as a person, reasons why you should get a second chance to the DA, and it's not going to be the police. But if the DA does decide to file charges, then they might look for more proof against the defendant. So they might get medical records from the alleged victim, not to see if there were any injuries or to see if this is really something that they should be prosecuting, but to get evidence against the defendant. Even if there's no significant injury, if there's any injury at all, they will use that against the defendant, whether or not it was actually caused by the defendant. And if there's no injury, they can still potentially have a domestic violence case, at least as a misdemeanor, for battery, for harmful or offensive contact, even with no injury. Another thing that the DA might do as sort of an investigation is if the police have collected the defendant's phone and not given it back. This is rare for a domestic violence case, but sometimes it happens. Then the DA will ask the police to image the phone to look for incriminating things on it. Again, they're not looking to see like, hey, was the defendant always sending loving texts to the alleged victim? Was there never a bad word that they ever said to the alleged victim, that we have any documentation of? No, they're not looking for that. They're just looking for if there's anything negative that they can possibly use. Look, it is important to remember that the police and the DA, they work together. At trials, a detective sits next to the prosecutor. They help the prosecution get convictions. That is their job. They want successful prosecutions because it means that they did a good job as police officers. And you can see from the investigation, this whole process, there is a lot missing. From the time that the police come out to the time that they make an arrest, it might be 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and now all of a sudden, even though once they make this arrest, there are potentially really dire consequences for the person that they arrested. It's not really calculated to get to the bottom of what happened. It is not hopeless, but it is important that you don't just sort of trust that the police did a thorough investigation here or expect that, maybe it's not over. The detective is still calling. Maybe he just wants my side of the story. Maybe the alleged victim can still get it dropped. The detective seems to think so. You cannot trust them. A lot of my clients are people who are arrested for the very first time for domestic violence. And yes, if you've never been arrested before and you're not a criminal defense attorney, you may really like and trust the police. They may have helped you in many situations. You may have friends who are police officers. I'm not saying that they are bad guys at all. I'm saying that they don't have a lot of time, that there's pressure on them to make arrests, especially if they spent time going out somewhere, that there's pressure on them to make domestic violence arrests, that some of them may have their own preconceived notions as, sort of tough men, that only men can be aggressors in these situations and not really believe or understand that actually you could have just been acting in self-defense. And they're not bad guys, but it is important to understand that in this situation, it is adversarial and you need to protect yourself and your record. I hope you found this video helpful. And again, if you have a restraining order in California and you're thinking about representing yourself, make sure you get your free first class in how to win your hearing via the description box down below. If you do have a criminal case in California, you can book a consultation with me. You can also find a link in the description box down below, and you can find my number there. And if you did find this video helpful, please don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the bell, and follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.